I'm a United Methodist for a lot of different reasons. Over the years, well, when I was in seminary in particular, I wondered, should I still be a United Methodist? Should I consider a different denomination? And time again, I came back to some of our core values that I really find inherent to my own belief system that I love. A commitment to social justice, a commitment to education, a commitment to caring for those in need, and the way we interpret scripture. Specifically, John Wesley, who sort of default started the United Methodist Church. That wasn't his intention. His intention was reform, but it happened at the time of colonization. It's a longer story that I'm not going to get into today, but John Wesley had certain key points for interpreting scripture. He said there's scripture, tradition, reason, and experience. Now, he named them as separate and distinct in that way and did never give them a universal title. But after he was dead, other scholars came and followed him and sort of saw the structure that he had set up and called it the Wesleyan Quadrilateral. So John Wesley wrote the components of it, but somebody else, I believe it was Albert Outler, defined it as the Wesleyan Quadrilateral. But that's how we talk about it. So how we interpret scripture is through the Wesleyan Quadrilateral. Scripture, tradition, reason, and experience. And we read a particular scripture, but we also look through the lens of the entire scripture. It's not just one verse, but sort of the whole of scripture. What does it say, and how would that particular piece be interpreted? Tradition is the Christian tradition, right? What has the church said through the centuries about this particular passage? And now, in the 20th and 21st centuries, with a particular recognition that the tradition was primarily held by literate white European men. And they had a particular perspective that didn't necessarily allow for the diversity of understanding globally or across gender norms. So the tradition, what has it said? There's still value there, right? The inherent interpretation that has taken place over centuries. Then reason, which I think is really easy to misinterpret. We can easily think that reason equals logic. That's not so. Logic is often subjective and or scientific, where really the way I understand reason is what I call the ologies: psychology, sociology, archaeology, geology. What do those sciences say that helps inform our reading of the scripture? So what type of culture, what type of norms, what type of economic system, what were the gender norms, economic norms, any of those kinds of things. That's what the ologies can help us understand. And then experience. The experience of the reader, but also readers within community. So my experience and your experience and his experience and her experience and Black experience and brown experience and queer experience and Asian experience and first world experience and developing world experience, right? Who we are is shaped very much so by where we grow up and in our family of origin and the type of community we grew up in, small or large or rural or urban. Any of those kinds of things influence who we are and how we read the scripture. And so our experience sort of colors how we hear the scripture. Now, some people will say, well, scripture is scripture is scripture. And basically Methodists as a premise say, no. I mean, it's there, but it's there for interpretation. And the events that happened were interpreted by the people that experienced them and the people who made meaning of them in the time period. And so in order to sort of get at a deeper meaning, a more holistic meaning, we use the Wesleyan Quadrilateral. We read through scripture, tradition, reason, those ologies or the sciences, and experience. And we can't do that in a vacuum. We really shouldn't even do it by ourselves, not for the long term. Sure, we can have our own devotion or Bible study, but ultimately we should be engaging scripture in community, the current community, as well as the longer term, broader historic community, as well as the global community. We can come to understand God's movement through different people and people groups over time and in different parts of the world if we sort of openly and honestly claim the perspectives that each one brings to the table. So that's a little gift that we have as we read the scripture, is just this basic assumption that we don't read scripture in a vacuum and that we do need to bring in science and experience and the tradition and other scriptures in order to get the best understanding.